Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Coach's Corner University podcast. I am your host, Paul O'Need, and as usual, the podcast is sponsored by Coach's Corner University. If you go to Coach's Corner University right now and use code podcast300, it'll save you $300 off of our education collective with close to 200 hours of lecture content on everything related to strength and conditioning, nutrition, biomechanics, case studies, you name it. We're also sponsored by TC Nutrition, Barefoot Shoes, and Bacon and Barbells. And you can see the links in the descriptions for those discount codes. Today, I am joined by Anthony Castore. Anthony is a fucking superpower in the world of peptides. And selfishly, I just wanted to have him on the podcast and pick his brain. Anthony, thank you so much.
It's an honor to be here. I'm a huge fan of your work and
Thank you.
really excited to get some information out there for your listeners and answer any questions I can.
Yeah, we're so Anthony and I met like in the hallway at Swiss a couple of years ago. Little did I know who I was talking to. Otherwise, I probably would have pulled him aside right then and there. So I'm wondering, could you intro yourself, give a bit of a background on? I mean, you are the self-proclaimed king of peptides. So where did that come from?
So I'm old, so I'm 52 now. And if we jump in a DeLorean and go back in time to when I was just graduating high school, I was about a buck 17, dripping wet. And girlfriend was 118 pounds. And freshman year, college over at Purdue, we're out at a bar late night, fight breaks out across the bar. She's like, "You realize I'd probably have to be the one that jumps in front if this were coming our way." That was kind of my impetus. Like, I should probably take up weight training.
Yeah.
So picked up some weights, had an amazing trainer, Chad Coy, friends to this day. He competes in World's Strongest Man. And 6 months I went from 117 to 185, completely natural.
Holy
And
shit.
always had a really curious mind and just wanted to know how things work. And as I saw the progress I made, and people started asking me, what are you doing? And started digging into the training, peptides kind of came on the radar. In fact, my first encounter with peptides was back in the 90s when I still thought I could do something in bodybuilding. I could not stand the smell of Protan. I mean, that stuff smells awful.
Yeah, it's pretty bad.
When I found out about melanotin, I was like, man, I'd take a shot of this a couple times and I'll be dark as can be. And it worked. And then I started reading about IGF-1 and all the cool stuff you could do with that, and just kind of followed peptides through the years. So when we fast forward, my passion for learning kind of took over. This is not an exaggeration. I've done every single peptide certification that's out there. A4M, I'm a fellow with SSRP. I'm the first non-medical professional to make fellowship. And I'll be speaking at the PWC. This is kind of on the DL, but I guess not now. I'll be speaking at the PWC this year. And really, it's cool. What we're doing is they realize the importance of strength training, and that for all the cool stuff that's out there about peptides and cellular medicine, it hinges on exercise, and what we're doing as strength coaches. So we're
Mhm.
really kind of bridging that gap and going to be presenting some stuff that ties it all together. So that's kind of the Cliff Notes version. Small kid, wanted to be bigger, passion for learning, and just devoured education along the way. And really, I'm just blessed to have been around people significantly smarter than me that put up with all the questions I ask.
That the origin story obviously is not uncommon in our space, right? You either grew up as a skinny kid or you grew up as a fat kid, and there was some catalyzing moment within your upbringing where you're like, okay, I got to start lifting weights. But one thing that I think I like to highlight, the things that set high performers apart from the average Joe, is that everyone who comes on this podcast and talks about their origin story talks about how they sought help and talked about how they sought mentorship and sought out education and weren't afraid to ask those questions. Who were some of the people initially that you just wanted to learn from? Was it the local bodybuilding coaches, or did you go straight to the medical field?
It was, I mean, I'm really blessed to have had the opportunity to work with the people I did. So when I first started out, Chad Coy was my trainer, and to this day, I think he's the most amazing trainer in the world. What he did for me was incredible. Took me under his wing, and through Chad, I ended up meeting a guy. His name was Mark Banter,
Okay.
and he had been Mr. Universe. And from him, I started learning about more of the bodybuilding stuff. And we academically, I was spending a lot more time in the gym than on the books, and ended up moving back to Ohio. And in Ohio, ended up meeting. I trained with Mike Francois.
Okay.
Um, Also trained with John Meadows for a while,
Oh,
and I
wow.
really wanted to get into work with Dr. Serrano, and he wasn't taking new patients, even though both Mike and John had talked to him.
Hmm.
Funnily enough, my mom, of all people, called him up and got him to see me. She's like, my son is just passionate about learning, and if you can just give him an hour of your time, you're a busy guy. I'll pay you whatever the hour is. I just want him to have a chance to ask some questions. I came in there with so many questions. He was like, I wasn't going to take any new patients, but I can see you really want to learn. Um, Come back in 6 months. And I had even more questions. And so he was like, we're not going to get all these done. Why don't you start coming in on Tuesdays, follow me around, and we'll just kind of make it a mentorship. So I got to learn from him. Then there was a little hiatus in there. Well, actually, while I was in Columbus, I went to Westside Barbell. I was there for about 2 years.
Amazing.
So I got to learn from Louis, and I ended up getting a job offer from Charles Poliquin to come work in Chicago at his facility out there.
Hmm.
Done a number of his courses, and
That's funny. I just the last podcast I recorded was Monday with Andre Benoit.
Andre is amazing. That
Yeah.
guy is incredible. Yeah,
He lives in my hometown. I had no idea until we met at Swiss this year. And I was
that's
like,
crazy.
what the fuck, man? I guess you just got a new best friend. He was like, oh.
Man, he is awesome. I had all the respect in the world for that guy.
Yeah.
So,
So Paula Quinn, yeah.
yeah, I guess to answer your question, kind of the training, but just my really curious mind pulled in the medical. And the more I was in the field, um, especially like mentoring under Charles, you really kind of develop that, how do you put all these systems together?
Hmm.
I love the challenge of learning the medical stuff. I didn't have the stomach for medical school. In fact, I got a really weak stomach. So it was the science I can handle, the seeing the stuff that you have to see as a doctor I cannot. So it I guess it's just kind of curiosity that keeps you going.
I love it. I love it. And it's a lesson for young people as well that like seeking mentorship and seeking help and asking those questions. Every person that I know who is where I want to be is always open to answering my questions. Like I've never met someone who flat out said, "No, I won't teach you."
I couldn't agree more. I think that people come to me and ask me for advice, and I tell them, whether it's me or whether it's somebody else, ask questions. Find somebody that you admire what they're doing, ask questions, learn from them. There's no better way to get to where you want to be. And just like you said, I'm always try to be as generous as I can with my knowledge because people were generous to me. And by doing that, I mean, you're paying it forward. These are people that I'm going to be learning from someday, and I look
Yeah.
forward to it. So I want to do everything I can to get them there so I can keep learning.
Yeah, man. I love that growth mindset. So let's jump right into it because I say all the time on the podcast that this is probably the most selfish thing that I do. I just invite cool people that I want to talk to. And, usually they get paid for consultations, but if I put the conversation on the internet, it ends up being free. So let's dive right into peptides. So I think most people are familiar on the surface level with the popular peptides that are around, mostly the healing peptides, the BPC 157s, the TB 500, GHK copper has come on board. And I had known all about these things in the past, as far as like healing tissue, digestive health. But when I suffered an injury about 20 weeks ago and I dove more into the science and I noticed that there's so much more out there in terms of peptide sciences. And one thing that has come onto my table as a coach has been the introduction of biomodulators. Could you give a little bit of a background, surface level, of what would be considered to be a biomodulator and what makes that different than these like individual peptides?
Sure. Yeah. And I think it is a really hot topic these days. So when we think about a peptide or like a bioregulator, biomodulator, what we're talking about is amino acids that are joined together by a peptide bond. So I just think of like two messengers that are holding hands. And if we've got four of them in a row, we're going to call that a bioregulator.
Okay.
And if we've got up to 43 of those, we're going to call that a peptide. And if we've got more than 43, that becomes like a polypeptide or um, something like growth hormone, even 191 amino acids. So
Hmm.
essentially, we've got different lengths of amino acids that are bound together. And when we take a step back and we think, well, okay, we've got these amino acids that are joined together, but what's that mean? Um, I kind of think about it like these short bioregulator peptides, 2 to 4 amino acids long. The cool thing is they're going to affect epigenetic change. And the reason they do it is just like just like me when I'm playing hide and seek. I'm short, so I can sneak into little nooks and crannies.
That's a great analogy.
With the bioregulator, they can sneak into those really specific spots on the DNA. And when you think about it like this, the DNA is going to be like this very specific sequence. And the bioregulator, what it is it's the essentially like the correct sequence for that spot on the DNA, whether it's, repairing bone or cartilage growth or lung tissue or something like that. And as we get old, it's almost like this combination lock that just starts to kind of get a little bit twisted out, and maybe that signal's not so good, so it's not replicating quite right. And then you put this magic key bioregulator on there, and it's going to correct that epigenetic signaling so that you have ideal gene replication. And the cool thing about it is it's not something that's really going to take you into a super physiologic range. So you don't have to worry about, is this going to disrupt things, negative feedback loop, that kind of thing. What it's doing is it's taking a 52-year-old guy like myself back to when I was 20 and still had hair and your best years and your best genes, and it's replicating those. It's making it possible for you to have like accelerated bone growth, accelerated tissue repair, better immune system function, those kind of things.
So these are mainly used in the health field. So if we're looking not necessarily for performance enhancement, but for probably longevity.
Yeah, I think there's well, it's kind of interesting. There's definitely a lot of application in terms of longevity and fixing, like if you have, I don't know, kidney damage or something like that. In fact, that's what they were originally developed for. Professor Kabat-Zinn in Russia, when these were first developed, what was happening was, if you think about how much money military is going to spend on people on a nuclear submarine, those are some of the top operators, and a lot goes into their training. And after 6 months on a submarine, these guys were coming back looking like, they just got in that DeLorean that I got in to go back to 20 years old, except they went way forward, and they're coming back like aged and all degenerated, and they're like,
Hmm.
we're going to lose these soldiers. So they invested all this money in how can we turn back that clock? How can we get these guys healthy? How can we protect them against that radioactive damage that can occur? And that's where bioregulators were born from.
So if I'm understanding correctly, these bioregulators are tissue specific. So there would be a different bioregulator for kidneys, bone, thyroid, liver, muscle.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Um, the there's different ones for different tissues. There's like a cartilage one. There's ones for like immune system, like thymus gland.
Mhm.
One for like vascular system for the liver, but and then there's like epitalin that is like it helps with protecting our telomeres, which, just to kind of unpack that for the audience if people aren't familiar, real easy way to think of a telomere is if you look down at your shoes, the plastic part around the shoelace on the end that protects it from fraying,
Mhm.
pretend like that shoelace is the DNA. And when it frays, that's bad DNA. and we want to keep that plastic thing in part because then the shoelace is okay. And as we get older, just like when we wear our sneakers, that end of the shoelace kind of starts to fringe apart. So when you take
Hmm.
like an epitalon, it rebuilds. It's like putting a plastic wrap over it again, so it protects the DNA. And some really amazing things it does in terms of like immune function and uh, improving telomere length and activity, and even mitochondrial biogenesis.
Interesting. I see like a lot of use cases here for even the performance enhancing crowd who, I mean, let's use, high level bodybuilder, power lifter has been abusing and using anabolics for years. And then one comes out of it realizing they still want to live a long life. Could this turn back the clock for that person?
Yeah, so with bioregulators, kind of the Cliff Notes version of how do we use these and how can we turn back that clock is generally like you're going to run four of them at a time, and it's going to be a 10-day course.
Okay.
And most of the time, like each month, you kind of change them for like what you foresee the challenges that are going to be upcoming or what you're trying to overcome. So, for example, bodybuilder, let's say the liver had taken a hit from orals, and
Hmm.
let's say there's been some negative effects on like nuclear genome. Um, so when we do something like an epitalon where we can um, regenerate those telomeres, and then we do something, for immune. We always want to have something for like immune function and vascular system. So like um, one of the thymic bioregulators, and one of the Vylon's really good for immune system, and then like a libogen. So you would do essentially four of these for like a 10-day course.
Okay.
Really simple: 10 milligrams in the morning, 10 milligrams in the evening, and each month, you run about three different courses, and um, then you just kind of rinse and repeat. Um, Something like epitalon, the way that I use it, because it's got a that, and the pinealon is another one I like to use often, and
Hmm.
this ties in to helping those bodybuilders, powerlifters come back from things that they might have done in the moment to improve performance, but maybe have some undesired long-term effects. Um, what we would do with these is use them to repair the pineal gland, which is going to help with like melatonin, sleep cycle, and
Hmm.
circadian rhythm. And once we kind of fine tune those, the body will start fixing a lot of things on its own, because then it's like this perfect clock that we've got that sets itself on daylight, and biology around us is now tuned up, and we're producing digestive enzymes when we want to. We're producing BDNF when we need to, things like that. So then all the things that might have taken a hit are going to work just by kind of winding that watch again.
And so this is done 10-day courses once a month.
10-day course, once a month, and usually like a morning and evening dose
Okay.
is traditionally the way to do it. Other nice thing about the bioregulators for a lot of people, um, one of the barriers to entry when we talk about peptides is going to be people just have this needle phobia. And most of the bioregulators, all the bioregulators are available orally. So it's something you just capsule in the morning, capsule in the evening, and don't have to think about it.
That's so interesting.
And so usually, like what I'll do is I'll do like thymogen and pinealon. Those are kind of the base, and
Okay.
then like I'll rotate in like a libogen, or like a epitalon, or whatever challenges I might have coming up, or whatever I'm trying to overcome.
Hmm.
And always kind of doing the four of them at a time. And there's really no right or wrong way to put them together. I've got some stacks that I've had good effects with for people. So, for the limited amount of data that I've compiled with the people that I'm working with, there's some things I found to be effective. But what's crazy is, as I continue to do these and track the data, I haven't found a combination that hasn't worked. So it's almost like it's Anthony proof. You can't mess it up.
um, like this is so fascinating to me because whenever I hear about any any drug product that is not Pfizer or Bayer or Moderna, that has amazing use cases and seemingly no side effects. Why aren't these products being picked up by large pharmaceutical companies?
It's a really good question. I think there's probably a couple reasons, and I don't know. This is just my theory. A lot of these are like naturally occurring, so it's going to be hard to patent these. And just kind of on a quick side note, when you think about these bioregulators, there's natural versus synthetic. The synthetic are going to work a little bit faster because it's really just amino acids, like raw materials, so really specific, like click, 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 the lock is fixed. Compared to the natural ones, are tissue derived, usually from like 12-month-old calves.
Sure.
And because they're tissue derived from these live animals, they're also going to have minerals and things in there, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it's going to change the metabolism of them a little bit. Um,
That's fascinating. The next question I would have is how much long-term data is available on these where could I run 10-day courses every month for the rest of my life?
Yeah, in fact, Professor Cabinson, since discovering these, did them. He passed away last year, but his mother, and I think she's in her 90s, she's still alive and taking epitalin, I believe, every day. And yeah, so to answer your question a little bit more specifically, if you go through like the studies that were done in Russia, and there's guy in the U.S. right now who's doing a large study. He's out of Atlanta. I think it's Bill Lawrence, um, and he's compiling a lot of human data. So the data is starting to pile up. There's like with all the peptides, there's a lot of animal data,
Mhm.
um, but we're starting to get more robust human data, and I think especially with Kennedy moving into the position he's in, I'm excited that I think we're going to see these
Yeah.
take a more active role as part of people's treatment and get to the point where instead of running around and putting out fires, we're taking a preventative approach and we're building healthy people. And pharmaceuticals really kind of take the place they're supposed to, which is, an acute thing. They're not bad, but they're not really, most of them aren't designed to be used like indefinitely. So if we can get people to where they only need them acutely, I think we're going to be in a better place.
Let's play devil's advocate here. What's the worst case scenario? I run something like this. Like, what are the potential side effects that I might run into?
The based on the information that I've sifted through in my entire research career, and I could be wrong. So this is just based on my research. I would say atrophy of the wallet. it that you spend the money and you don't get the result that you want. Um, that I really haven't seen any negative things, and when I think about like mechanistically how they work, even on the epigenetic level, they're not going to change your DNA or genes and how they express. All they're going to do is essentially reset them to what they're supposed to be.
It's whenever I hear something like that, there's a few things in the market right now that I mean, TB 500 and BPC 157 are two of the peptides where it's like, even if they don't work, they don't hurt you.
Yeah.
So like what's the worst case? That's where my mind always goes with this stuff. It's like, what's the worst case scenario? Well, if the worst case scenario is that they don't work, well, you were gonna be fucked up anyway.
Yeah, it's kind of how I look at it. The there was some concern with TB4 and cancer
Oh,
because in certain types of cancer they found elevated levels of TB4. But there was a really prominent researcher specifically with TB4 up in Canada, and I'm blocking out his name right now. And actually, the way he described it makes a lot of sense
okay.
that where they saw those elevated levels of TB4, it was more likely that the body was actually producing these to fight against the cancer. That when we look
Oh,
at newborn babies, when they're developing their immune system and all the things that make them strong and able to go through life, there are really high levels of TB4. So to think that, this is something that's cancerous, well, why don't babies get cancer? The, um, the with BPC, I think. the concern would be like it increases VEGF, vascular endothelial growth factor.
Hmm.
Again, there's some concern like, well, what if it just indefinitely, uh, you know, too much vascularization to the point that it's cancerous? I
Fair.
haven't seen it in any of the studies. Any concern would be theoretical at best. And even like when we look at the GLP-1s, and there's some theoretical concern over like if somebody's got history of thyroid cancer, but again, there hasn't been a single reported case that I'm aware of. In fact, they're cardioprotective. They were originally developed to protect people's brains, and
Hmm.
they even stimulate bone growth, and they're finding favorable effects on microbiome. So, yeah.
GLPs are absolutely fascinating to me because we actually did a deep dive from a coaching standpoint on how GLPs influence the coaching practice. I posted that a couple days ago. But one of the things that has been really fascinating to me is the organ protective nature, because obviously, if we're improving insulin sensitivity and we're improving blood sugar management, we're going to have a decrease in cortisol. We're going to have a decrease in global inflammation. Then, when you add in something like the retatrutide, which is involved in liver metabolism, well, now you're going to be improving liver metabolism and you're going to be lowering those liver enzymes. So to me, I looked at, well, full disclosure, I'm trying retatrutide right now, just at a very low dose.
Yeah,
It's I have not, this is the craziest part for me to understand. I haven't changed anything. I just added the retatrutide in and dropped my calories by 100 calories. I've dropped 11 pounds.
that's incredible.
And no change in physical activity, no change in training. My step count's the same, nutrition's the same. Uh, yeah, my appetite's a little bit suppressed, but I can still get all my food in. I haven't had any side effects from nausea or anything like that because I'm only running 2 milligrams a day.
It's really cool the way these work. I mean, people think when they hear the weight loss that it's coming from appetite suppression and they're eating less. And in some people that's the case, but in the
Yeah.
people like yourself that don't do like a big calorie drop, they're still basically eating the same and energy expenditure is the same. It's really speaking to the importance of managing blood sugar.
Hmm.
And with the retatrutide in particular, what happens is it modulates glucagon, and that's what's going to break down carbohydrates for energy more efficiently. So you have more efficient energy production. And when you are supporting uh, the health of the cell, the efficiency of the cell, and you're able to supply it with energy faster without having to necessarily increase your energy expenditure, you're more efficient at expending energy at the same tasks, if that makes sense.
It makes total sense. And anecdotally speaking for myself, I'm actually noticing like my training performance is going up.
Yeah,
It's like, well, obviously, because you're going to be having better metabolism of glycogen. So those longer training sessions, you're going to be able to sustain that output. So, I mean, simply fascinating for me. And I'm diving into the research on my own and seeing about like, potentially there's implications for some of my high performance athletes. And, this isn't something that I'm going to be pushing on people without a question. But if someone wants to try it, to me, this is one of those things. It's like, as long as you don't have a history of thyroid cancer in your family, it's probably something that's either going to work or it's just going to drain your wallet.
the, for all the people that I work with, just about all the people I work with, basically I microdose it for them, and
That's
some
what
of
I'm
them
doing.
get
Yeah.
appetite suppression, some of them don't. But what I'm really going after is the cardio protection, the neuroprotection, improvement potential for improvement in bone density, all the things that are going to translate into a long, healthy life. And
Hmm.
when you throw on top of that, even at the microdose, it's regulating blood sugar a lot more effectively. And I have people use a glucose monitor so we can monitor that. In fact, what's really funny is, traditionally they like to titrate these up. And
Yeah.
um, I've worked with over 100 people, and out of over 100 people, 134, we've only gone up on dose on two people, and they went up on dose on their own. I didn't tell them to. And the when people kind of hit like that speed bump where they're like, maybe I should go up. I feel like it's not working. I'm like, well, where are your blood sugars at? Their blood sugars are still in a healthy range. So it's like, it's not that it's not working, it's that something else isn't working. 9 times out of 10, it's going to be one of two things. One, most common, hydration, because it's
Mhm.
going to decrease your desire to drink. And this ties into peptides in general. When we talk about hydration, it's really more about cell volume. When a cell is volumized, those antennas, which are receptors on the cell, are going to be upright, and it's going to be a lot easier to send and receive signals so the peptides work. And when that cell's dehydrated, even if we were drinking enough water and taking our minerals and electrolytes, if we don't have neutral osmolytes, and that's going to be like creatine or
Mhm.
glutamine, glycine, those things that are going to pull those into the cell, then what happens is you don't have proper cell volume. So it affects the cell signaling, and you're not going to get the most out of your peptides.
Well, one of the other reasons that I wanted to use it was coming back from this injury. I fractured both my patellas and tore my quads. Um, and so I was like, okay, well, if it can help with bone density, that's going to help me in this situation. But then on top of that, I know, because coming from a strength and conditioning background, that one of the main issues with returning to sport is a loss of insulin sensitivity in those affective tissues. So if I can improve that with a microdose of the retatrutide while I'm retraining, the results have been crazy. Like, we're on Sunday, I'm according to the timeline that I was provided by my clinicians, on Sunday I'm allowed to do body weight squats.
Man, that's awesome.
Just wait. This morning, I leg pressed 5 plates for 20 reps to better depth than I had before surgery.
That's incredible.
So, like, I'm a believer here, and this is kind of I don't want to be feeding into my biases talking to you, but I kind of am. Um, yeah, I just think there's so many applications for these medicines outside of what we're being fed by the pharmacology, like the big pharma. It's like these are not just weight loss drugs, and there are so many secondary and tertiary benefits that we can glean from even the smallest of dosages.
You're exactly right. And what's really kind of cool, and this ties into like repurposing medications, which I'm really into, is initially they're going to look at how can I get this product to market as fast as possible. So when you think about how large the diabetic population is, like that and the overweight population, those are two really easy targets. And as soon as it's gone through essentially those clinical trials that establish the safety at said dose, then they can really easily fast track it through trials for, and that's why we saw now it's for cardio protection. The
Mhm.
original data that they compiled was going to be used for neuroprotection, and it just comes down to there's a much more much more profitable market for diabetes and weight loss than there is for people that are preventatively thinking about their brain health. And the joint stuff, I mean, it's really piling up. There's every day I'm reading new studies about the effects of GLP-1s on inflammation, arthritis, all that stuff. So your experience is backed up by the research, and it's just so cool to hear firsthand and continue to read the research.
Yeah, it's been one of the most fascinating parts about my recovery is like I have no desire to compete at a high level in powerlifting anymore. I was injured in a powerlifting meet, and I have no desire to compete at a high level anymore. So for me, it was more like, okay, well, how can I use this as a learning opportunity to potentially glean some knowledge that I can help with my clients? And I had a number of clients who were prescribed GLP-1s for a various number of conditions. And I was like, well, if I'm going to have clients that are going through this and I have access to these drugs, I'm going to try it because there's a lot of potential benefit here. And it's been nothing short of ridiculous. If I could, that's the word I would use is
Yeah,
ridiculous.
yeah, it's it's crazy. I mean, when we see what these peptides can do, and really, we think about these are things that we make in our body, and these are just this is what happens when we've got the right amount of them, and signals are going where they're supposed to, and it's incredible. It's like you can piece together the person you want to be. You can fix things, you can improve things, you can I don't like thinking in terms of longevity, but because we don't know how many years we're going to get. But if we can get the most out of every year, whether it's 60 or 360, that I mean, 360 would be pretty amazing.
That'd
But
be a rough life.
yeah, the and that's what the peptides do. The peptides and bioregulators are really allowing us to get the most out of every day, every year that we have.
So let's shift the conversation a little bit. We kind of started talking about energy metabolism, and that's been a really big subject of conversation in the health and fitness realm is this conversation around mitochondrial health. Okay, so for people who don't know, the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. It's also responsible for so much more. And there's a number of peptides and different chemicals that are coming out that are said to improve mitochondrial function, improve mitochondrial biogenesis, improve, efficiency of mitochondrial function. Talk to me a little bit about where that's going.
That is my favorite area to talk about and look into. I mean, it's
Perfect.
incredible. Just to kind of speak in terms of the scope of how important mitochondria are, whether we're talking about aging, sport performance, vision, any of those things comes down to mitochondria. And an interesting side note about mitochondria, I always love this little bit of trivia. 100% of the DNA, and it's DNA specific to mitochondria that we get, comes from our mother. So,
Really?
yep. So, thank you, Mom. I got some good DNA.
Oh, me too, man. Thanks, Suze.
But yeah, so to talk about some of these mitochondrial peptides that are out there, there's a number of them and some really cool small molecules we'll get into too. Probably the one that people have heard of the most is the MOTSC, and
Yeah.
that's really one of my favorites. It is incredible. To kind of speak about the scope of like what it does, it's what we would call an exercise mimetic. And to pull that apart so it makes a little bit more sense, it's actually just like what it sounds like. It's when we exercise, there's oxidative stress that's created, and that interacts with the outer membrane of the mitochondria, and that triggers the AMPK pathway, which is going to be responsible for like some of our energy metabolism. And when we think about longevity, one of the things that are going to slow down that aging process, like when people take metformin, for instance, it's something that drives that AMPK pathway.
Okay.
And what MOTS does is it mimics the signal that would trigger that outer membrane of the mitochondria to have that adaptation to exercise that leads to longevity, performance, all the positive effects from exercise, essentially.
Are
Um,
you getting any changes in heart rate or basal body temperature with these sorts of drugs?
I haven't seen any changes in terms of heart rate or um, body temperature. I've seen improvements in performance on a regular basis. Everybody that's done the that I've put on Motsi, 100% of them, I've seen performance improvements. And in terms of like, what are we talking about for numbers? I've seen people that got winded if they were walking a flight of stairs to now they're out there jogging.
Oh my
And
goodness.
but then when we're talking about like elite athletes, like NFL players, that kind of thing, um, they're at such a high level that they're a little bit closer to that ceiling. So we're going
Mhm.
to see them like just kind of stay at that ceiling, but and they're like, man, I feel like I'm recovering better. The I think a lot of like when you're to kind of differentiate between the two situations, if you have somebody that's really deconditioned, there's a lot more room for improvement in terms of like exercise tolerance. And you're kind of fast forwarding. It's like they're getting in years worth of jogging they should have been doing by taking this peptide. So it kind of catches them up. When we're talking about an elite athlete, the biggest benefits they're going to see by improving the function of the mitochondria, the way that MOTS and some of these other mitochondria peptides do, you're going to see a huge improvement in terms of metabolic flexibility, ability to use fat and carbohydrate for energy. So they're not going to get tired when they're out there doing sport, and they're going to have better insulin sensitivity. So when we think about on the most basic level, like after a workout, we have to refuel. What if 100% of the fuel that we're putting in goes exactly where it needs to? We'll recover faster. And I think that's kind of what we see.
Well, the way that I've always conceptualized the importance of mitochondrial health when it comes to high performance is if we consider the athlete as an engine. And there are some athletes, those high performers, that have a lot of horsepower. but there's only so much gas that you can put in the gas tank. So there's two things you can improve. You can improve the size of the gas tank, and you can improve how fast that gas tank gets refilled. And when we focus on mitochondrial health, both of those things get optimized because we have that improvement in the amount of gas that we can hold, and then we also have an improvement in the rate at which we can refill with gas. So that horsepower can be better utilized.
I love that. I'm going to borrow that.
It's all
that's,
yours, man.
that's a brilliant analogy. That's absolutely perfect. Yeah,
It's the way that I can, like, I look at this the same way that I look at why zone 2 cardio is great for everybody. It's like all we're doing is improving the size of our gas tank and how fast we can refill it, because all recovery from exercise is aerobic. Like all of
exactly.
our glycogen storage, all of our, uptake, it's ATP modulated, and that ATP comes from aerobic metabolism.
That's perfect. I couldn't have said it better. The I
Podcast done. There you go.
mic drop. Yeah. The
Uh,
I guess kind of unpack a couple of the other mitochondrial
yeah.
peptides, and this will kind of, and then we can talk about how do we rotate these and why do we
Mhm.
rotate them. Some other ones that people are probably going to hear about. There's a SS31. SS31 is also a mitochondrial peptide. What's unique about it is when we think about our mitochondria, and essentially there being two layers, inside, outside, and in between these layers, we have it's called cardiolipin, and it's almost like a shock absorber, and it maintains the structural integrity of our mitochondria. And to build on your analogy, like when we have more of these mitochondrias and a bigger gas tank that we can put so more gas tanks, bigger gas tanks we can fill up with more fuel, then the limiting factor essentially would be like, well, if we're driving these really hard and bolts start to fall out or whatever,
Mhm.
we got to make sure that they're holding together. So when we do something like a MOTS-C exercise mimetic, and we're building more mitochondria through mitochondrial biogenesis and improving fuel utilization. Now, we've got this really nice army of mitochondria. They're working really, really well, but we need to make sure they're tuned up. So that's where we kind of rotate to something like an SS31 to stabilize the cardiolipin, make sure everybody's all bolts are tightened, and we could get, drive pedal to the metal again. And so that's kind of the unique thing about SS31. When we think in terms of mitochondrial peptides, just kind of the simple categorization would be MOTS-C performance, SS31 repair, and then the third one, humanin. The unique thing about that is it's able to, well, SS31 can as well, more effectively target mitochondria in the brain, um, and it inhibits autophagy. So um, it's helping repair those mitochondria in the brain and make sure they're working optimally in terms of ability to use glucose and everything. But then it's also preventing them from dying off. So then when we cycle back to our MOD-C and we're building more and more and more mitochondria, we've kept all the good ones from the beginning. They've got stable cardiolipin from the SS31, and the humanins, tuning the ones in the brain up and preventing die off from the ones that we want to keep around.
So whenever we talk about mitochondria, we have to talk about L-carnitine, right?
Uh-huh.
So is this something, like, I'm a big L-carnitine guy, like I'll probably take it for the rest of my life. Is this something where, non-negotiable, all your people are taking injectable L-carnitine?
I think carnitine is a great thing to use in the context of getting fat to the mitochondria to be metabolized for energy. And then the other part of that equation is now that we've transported an energy source over there, we also need to think about, well, what's the gasoline that keeps that engine running? And
Mhm.
that's where things like the conversation around NAD plus is going to come in. And what NAD plus does is it just donates an electron, which is like giving that car gas and keeping it running. So we've got something that's taking the fat over, we've got something that's making that engine continue to run, and we've got something that's building more engines, something that's repairing those engines, and something that's preventing those engines from getting stolen or broken. So that's kind of the full circle. Now, on the NAD, I know a lot of people are into the NAD IVs, and I'm adamantly opposed to those, and I'll
Oh.
explain why. When we think about NAD, it's terrific. Like I'm all for NAD. When we take an NAD IV, what we're doing is we're dumping a ton of NAD into our system. And what you want to think about, and I'll use you for an example,
Mhm.
if you don't mind.
Yeah, please.
So, like after you have an injury, there's going to be senescent cells. And with senescent cells, what happens is there's an upregulation of an enzyme called CD38. Um, and the way to think about when we talk about an upregulation of an enzyme, imagine all your cells want NAD, and all of a sudden you give the bullhorn to the senescent cells, or also cancer cells, um, because of this upregulation of CD38. So it happens when that you get this big dump of NAD, and it's like I got to get out of here. There's an NAD backup. I need to find a place to park, and it's only going to hear those cells with the bullhorn. So most of it's going to go to senescent cells and cancer cells. So that's
Oh.
obviously a bad thing. And in fact, a little bit of trivia, when people take NAD and they're like, man, I feel so much energy. I got this flush. That's
Mhm.
literally these dead cells, senescent cells sucking it up. And it's like, I tell them, I'm like, that is not a good thing. So a
Well,
better
can't
alternative,
can't NAD cause like an allergic reaction?
it I don't know the answer to that. I think if my interpretation of it, and I'll have to do a little bit more research on this, my interpretation of it would be what people perceive to be a allergic reaction is similar to like a flush that you would get with niacin, and that's
Uh,
uh, senescent cells just sucking up the NAD. Um, the better alternative when you think about, well, we need NAD, but how do we get it in there without having too much, and how do we silence these jackasses with bullhorns?
mhm.
So it's really simple. There's another peptide out there. It's called 5-amino-1-MQ, and that's a mouthful. I won't quiz people on that. um, but what the 5-amino-1-MQ does, when we think about NAD kind of floating around in our body and what's going to make it go away, there's this enzyme, NNMT. NNMT is going to break down that NAD. So if we have something that's going to suppress that NNMT, that lets the NAD that we're naturally making kind of take its time going around, filling up all the good cells. When it sees those bad cells with the bullhorns, it just kind of goes by them, and it's like, I think I'm going to go find a good cell. So we kind of solve that problem. We don't need more NAD. We just need it to go to the right place. And it'll do that when we decrease the NNMT. And then it's a 1-2 punch, and this will even improve sleep. Before you go to sleep, about an hour before you go to sleep, you take apigenin, 400 milligrams, and that's going to downregulate the CD38. So
Mhm.
all those bad cells that got the bullhorn, it's like you just took it away from them, and you're going to get a good night of sleep. So if you do like the 5-amino-1-MQ with apigenin, you got a 1-2 punch that's going to give gasoline to that mitochondria and help you use the fat that's being deposited or carried over from the carnitine more effectively. And you kind of check all the boxes for both health and performance.
This is a lot of shit, man. It's a lot of stuff. Talk to me about methylene blue. How does that
Methylene blue
like?
is awesome, super cool stuff.
Yeah.
It is one of the staples of my COVID long hauler protocol, and
Okay.
um, the good about methylene blue is it makes it a lot easier for your cell to make ATP, which is one of the challenges we have after like a virus or in certain like chronic fatigue conditions. We need that ATP for energy, and basically it's going to skip the first two steps of oxidative phosphorylation, make us more efficient at making ATP. um, there's also some research that says it can help stabilize the cardiolipin. It's got some antibacterial properties too, which is kind of cool. The downside to methylene blue, and why I don't have people use it like every day, is because well, I guess there's two things. One, you want to make sure you're getting it from a compounding pharmacy. The reason for that, or a GMP, good manufacturing product, Reason for that is the ones that are not coming from there, they're going to be heavily tainted with metals. So you really
Mm.
keep an eye on that. The other thing is nitric oxide, and we need that for like our brain, endothelial tissue.
Hmm.
When we work out, that's our pump.
Right.
um, so my strategy with the methylene blue is I'll do it on non-workout days, and I'll use that with and we can talk about these also, like a BAM 15. So then I'm getting something that's making it easier to make energy in the presence of something that makes it more complicated to make energy, but increases mitochondrial biogenesis and um, puts us in energy system where we're relying on fat for fuel versus glycolysis. And then on the days that I'm training, um, that would be something where I do like the 5 amino 1MQ that we talked about with the MOTC, and there are some other things you can throw in there too, like another one we can talk about, the SLU-PP332,
Hmm.
which is kind of a newer mitochondrial molecule.
Yeah. So let's dive into, I mean, now we're getting into fat as fuel, right? We're getting into
Uh,
fat metabolism. Talk to me about, you mentioned it before the podcast. It sounded too good to be true. The BAM 15 and then the SLUPP332, from my understanding, is an estrogen receptor modulator.
it's so the SLU PP332 is a estrogen related receptor. Um, it's called a ERR, estrogen related receptor, and it has no estrogen properties. It doesn't interact with estrogen at all. It
Okay.
reacts with nuclear receptors, so right in the nucleus of the cell. And the reason it's called a ERR, estrogen related receptor modulator, is structurally it looks almost identical to estrogen. So it's one of those things like looks pretty close to estrogen. I can't think of a good name for it. We'll just call it an ERR.
Right.
And um, the so you asked about the BAM 15. We'll cover that
Yeah.
first. So the BAM 15. Some of the listeners, maybe I'm sure you've probably heard of the DNP,
Of
mitochondrial
course.
inhibitor, and
Hmm.
it's it's the holy grail of fat loss. There's no two ways about it.
Except it fucking kills you.
Yeah, obviously, the side effects are pretty bad. Nobody wants to get cooked from the inside out.
Yeah.
And one of the problems, the reason that happens, like there's a misconception about the half life of DNP. It's actually close to, I think it's 6 hours, but people say 36 hours. The reason it's 36 hours, a lot like ketamine, that also has a short life, short half life, it deposits in numerous tissues. So where it deposits, it's essentially still active, but that's not really factored into the half life. So what's this
Gotcha.
mean? When it's in these tissues and it's uncoupling mitochondria, and when we talk about uncoupling mitochondria, what that means is if you kind of think about these mitochondria as our powerhouse, little engines in a car, and these engines are normally kind of burning the calories to produce energy efficiently, and there's always this little leftover waste in the form of heat. Um, then you have these mitochondria uncouplers that come in, and there's a lot more waste, so there's a lot more heat, and that's where the calories are getting burned off. It's just creating this incredible amount of heat by making uh, us a lot less effective at producing ATP. Um, and with the DNP, it's not really tissue selective, so that's happening in all these different tissues in the body, and we don't know where the residue's landing. So you really have to manage that. Dangerous. It was it used to be a weight loss drug, and then they pulled it off because people were cooking themselves from the inside out.
Hmm.
So when we talk about BAM 15, what's so cool about this is, unlike the older compounds, it's designed to avoid overheating, and it accomplishes this by being more tissue specific. So we kind of know where it's going to deposit, and it's only got a 1 hour half life. So in my studies, they've done the equivalent of, it would be well over 1,000 milligrams for a human. No rise in body temperature, no negative effects or anything, but um, definite improvements in mitochondrial biogenesis it one of the challenges with cancer is you're in a state of glycolysis, and it switches
Hmm.
you out of that state of glycolysis to where you're using fat. So it starves those cancer cells because now your body can run. The good cells can use fat for energy, and you don't have to take in that sugar that's feeding the cancer cells. So it's got
That's
application
fascinating.
for decreasing fatty liver. It's got application for just looking good. That's why I use it. I, I got a hot fiance, and she's not going to keep me around if I don't do something.
Dude, I feel the same way.
And it's also, just this broad range of benefits, mitochondrial biogenesis. So you get the performance benefit, anti-cancer benefits, decrease in fatty liver. And based on the research, and I've been studying this since about 3 years before COVID.
Hmm.
So, I mean, significant amount of research on it and no negative side effects to date. And I've used it myself and no problems at all. And I've seen improvements in liver enzymes. And within 10 days, you always give yourself that kind of mirror check in the morning, like, all right, how am
Yeah.
I looking today?
Oh yeah.
Within 10 days, it's like, without changing my diet, without changing my training or anything, it's like, man, I feel pretty decent about myself.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's amazing. Really cool stuff.
So then how would that stack with an SLUPP 332?
Yeah. So what I do with the SLU PP332, um, that's also going to improve mitochondrial biogenesis, and it massively increases metabolism. Are you familiar with what's called a futile cycle?
Uh, let's explain it for the
Okay, sure.
audience.
So, really, an easy way to think about it is like, ATP is our currency of energy.
Hmm.
And we make a certain amount and we burn a certain amount. Let's say we make, just for numbers sake, we make 3 ATP, we burn 3 ATP, and there's a certain amount of um, energy that's expended with that process.
Hmm.
So a futile cycle would be, we're going to increase the production of ATP to say 30, and these are just arbitrary numbers.
Right.
But when we increase it to 30, we use 30. So there's no real change in like uh, what am I trying to say? There's no real change in anything because it's kind of canceling out. It's like we're making more, but we're burning more. But what
Right.
does happen is there's going to be heat created, not like the positive feedback loop you see with DNP, but there's heat created that translates into energy expenditure. Um, and improves things like muscle function because essentially you have more energy, you can get more reps, but you have enough fuel to support it and enough recovery to support it. Um, so while it's not changing energy balance, there's futile cycles, essentially metabolizing fat more effectively, and increasing like the production of ATP as well as the ability to use ATP. So your body gets more adept at, how do I use this energy source most efficiently, and how do I make this energy source most efficiently. So on the training days, that's something I would put in there, um, and then on the non-training days is where I'd use the BAM 15 because that's going to make it harder to produce energy, and that's where I would also use the, if I was going to stack it, the methylene blue, because I'm not worried about decreasing the nitric oxide on the non-training days as much.
If I'm listening to this and I'm like, wow, like the all of these things sound incredible, why wouldn't I just take all of them
the the
forever?
the so I guess my theory on that is just like anything out there, best supplement we can think of, best food we can think of, there's always going to be that point where body kind of figures it out. But that being said, if we can strategically cycle these in and out, I think you can continue to use them, see benefit, not see side effects. So like just to kind of give you like a real general example of um, how I kind of do things. I'll usually do like a GHRH, GHRP in the background, and like a mitochondrial peptide will just say MOTC, and like a 5-amino 1-MQ. So I'm kind of doing something for mitochondria, for HPA axis, growth hormone, something for supporting healthy NAD, and maybe like a GLP-1 for all the benefits those offer. And then next cycle, what I do, I still want to check those boxes, but I want to have a different stimulus. So I'll switch to a different GHRH, GHRP combo. That might be where I do a little bit of mitochondrial fix up. So switch from the MOTS to the SS31 and switch from like the 5 amino 1-MQ to like a 1-MNA, which is classified as a nutrition supplement. And it's basically something that's produced when we're making NAD. It's like recycling your NAD.
Okay.
And it also doesn't pose a threat with that elevated CD38 that we talked about. And switch to a different GLP-1. So, like if I started on, say, semaglutide and cagrilintide, then I'd rotate to like a tirzepatide or a retatrutide. And then, just kind of rinse and repeat, third time through, maybe for my mitochondrial peptide, I'm using like a humanin, and then, different GHRH, GHRP combo, and not worrying about pushing the NAD, but maybe that would be a place where I'd rotate in some bioregulator stuff, based on blood work. What organ systems are the weakest link in the chain? Everything's probably going to be pretty healthy, but there's always going to be something that could be just a little bit better. So maybe I target that with some bioregulators and wind back that epigenetic clock.
And how long would these courses be? Like, how
Um,
long would a cycle of these peptides be?
it's dependent on like the training stimulus, the person,
Mm-hmm.
um, the things that I use to evaluate that. There's a device. It's called the PNOE, PNOE, and
Mm-hmm.
it's a breath analysis. So when you breathe in there, it'll give you like your VO2 max, energy expenditure, and what you can see with that is like how long are you using fat, and then when do you start using sugar? So the longer you're using fat before you switch to using sugar, the healthier that mitochondria is. So if I'm seeing improvements there, then that's a good indication that don't need to change the mitochondria stuff. But if I see that that's kind of stagnated or regressed, that would be where I think about switching to a more of a repair mitochondria peptide. And then the humanin is usually just like a 20-day course for me, and then like a month off and back to the MOTS-C.
Okay,
With
so we are taking like time off of all of these at some point.
yeah, it's they're all being kind of rotated in and out throughout the year. As far as like for me personally, like being off peptides completely, I'd say there really isn't a time during the year that there's always going to be some peptides in there. But as far as like the ones that I use, those are going to be rotated based on what am I currently trying to work on, what's the biometric feedback I'm getting from the PNOE and my blood work, and what's the training stimulus. Give you an example, like if I was doing more of a neural phase of training, like where I'm going for top end strength, and most of the adaptation is going to be in the central nervous system, compared to something like sarcoplasmic hypertrophy, where it's going to be more of a cell swelling. Um, that's where I'm going to use things like cerebrolysin or dihexa. That's going to increase like BDNF and synaptogenesis and neurogenesis. Whereas if I'm doing something that's going to be more reliant on like that cell swelling effect and ability to store glucose and use glucose, that's when I'm leaning more heavily on like the mitochondrial peptides and those kind of things.
Dude, this is I feel like we could talk for fucking days about this stuff because
I love talking about this. I get carried away.
to me it's so fascinating the various number one, everyone gives a shit about performance and everyone gives a shit about how they look. I don't care what people say.
I
You
agree.
want you want to look jacked and you want to be strong.
Yep.
Plain and simple. Male, female, whatever.
Yeah.
But then when we look at the actual background of, well, you can accomplish that and actually improve the quality of your cellular function and improve the longevity. And I love the fact that you clarified, you don't like the word longevity because we don't have any way to predict the number of
Yeah.
years on this planet. I look at longevity in terms of like health span versus lifespan. Like if I can
Absolutely.
get the most out of my years,
Yeah.
I want to live my life as a lion, not a lamb, but
Exactly.
at the end of the day, if we can have our cake and eat it too,
Yeah.
why wouldn't we do that?
Absolutely.
Anthony, this has been friggin' cool, and I cannot thank you enough. I'm hoping, like, would you be open to coming on and talking a little bit more
I'd
about
love
some of the
to.
other peptides, especially like, me myself being a former powerlifter. There's a lot of powerlifting coaches that listen to the podcast, talking more about the neurological function associated with peptide usage
Yeah, it'd be a
in the
great
future.
conversation.
Amazing. And so I always ask this to my podcast guests at the end. Is there someone that you think would be a fantastic guest to be on the podcast that you'd like me to interview? And if so, the qualifying part of this is you have to help me get them on the podcast.
I'd be happy to. I guess to answer the question best as possible, um, are you thinking in terms of training or supplementation or
Anything that would help coaches do a better job.
so guy that I bounce ideas off of and who I even mentored under, who I think is absolutely brilliant. Um, I'll throw three names out there. So Dr. Seeds to me is like absolutely just amazing. He is probably the most brilliant person I've ever met, and I'm just grateful that he's given me the opportunity to learn from him and be part of his organization. So I think he is so versed in, I mean, everything like hypertrophy, supplementation, all that stuff. I mean, he'd be amazing. The other two people that I think would be incredible, Alex Keuchel,
Oh
brilliant
yeah.
guy. Absolutely love Alex. I mean, he is brilliant, but he's also just a great human. I mean, just awesome person. Honored to call him a friend. And other guy is his name's Brian Graham. He works with a group. It's called Everspan. And Brian is one of these under the radar guys, but he
Mhm.
is brilliant. I have learned so much from him. In fact, a really cool topic to have him talk to your listeners about would be biological seasonality. And it's fascinating. We always think about planning our training cycles or our peptide cycles, supplementation. But one of the things that we overlook often is the influence that like the environment has on us, like the time of
Oh
year.
yeah.
And he knows his stuff inside out, and really anything else you'd ask him. So I know you asked for one, but any of those three I think would be an amazing conversation for you and
I
your
love it.
listeners.
I love it. Is there anything that so if there was one parting word of wisdom that you would have for the audience, what would it be?
Um, Parting word of wisdom, I would say, is be curious, be passionate about learning, and find people to ask questions to. That I know myself, and I know Paul, and the people who've been generous enough to be a mentor for me. Like we love helping people. We love
Mhm.
answering questions. Reach out to us. We want to help, and that's like I said earlier. I look forward to learning from you guys. So be curious, ask questions, and find people to ask questions to.
I love it. Is there anything that you'd like to plug? Any, sponsors or products or things that you're doing that you want to promote?
Got a couple really exciting things in the pipeline. The BAM 15 and the SLU PP332 we talked about,
Hmm.
actually bringing those to market. Um, and then in terms of people that are interested in learning about peptides and really, fine tuning their knowledge and not just getting a protocol, but actually understanding like why it works. Highly recommend checking out the peptide therapy certification that SSRP offers. The
Okay.
really cool thing is, as a strength coach, you actually are certified after you do that. It's a specific certification that'll denote that you're a strength coach, not a prescriber, but same credentials. And as I said, I'll be speaking for them at the Peptide World Congress in June in Vegas. Um, and it's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to tie in like some real world data about case study stuff like with peptides and training, so you can see how it all fits together. But just can't say enough good things about the organization and Dr. Seeds as a person, and how much enthusiasm he has for strength coaches, the strength coaching community, and just helping us all bridge that gap between medicine and strength training, so we're all working together and getting better results.
I love it. Thank you so much for joining me today. Everyone, thank you so much for listening. Please make sure to like, share, subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications. And we'll catch you on the next one.
Thanks again for having me on, Paul. It's really an honor to be on here, and anything I can do to help, just ask.
I will for sure. Thanks.
Yep.